All right, strap yourselves in, folks, because this one's a doozy. Today, we're diving deep into a YouTube video you won't believe.
Oh, yeah. What's this one about?
It's called Jesus Christ is Lucifer.
Whoa, that's a bold statement right off the bat.
Yeah, no kidding. And get this, it's from a channel called, wait for it, Morgue Official.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued.
The whole video argues that Jesus and Lucifer aren't actually enemies like we've always been told.
Really?
Instead, it says they're two sides of the same coin. They actually represent the same archetype.
I have to admit, that's a pretty wild concept. Where do they even begin to make that case?
Well, right from the start, they really lean into the whole light imagery. You know, the kind of language that's used to describe both Jesus and Lucifer?
Yeah, light is super symbolic in a lot of different religions and philosophies. It's usually associated with, like, knowledge and truth, even spiritual enlightenment. But I'm curious how they use it to connect these two figures.
Right. Well, they throw around a lot of biblical titles and phrases, like for Jesus, you've got light of the world and morning star. But then for Lucifer, they bring up lightbringer and son of the dawn.
So they're pointing out that shared language, the idea that both figures are associated with light in some way. Interesting.
It almost feels like they're trying to hint at some deeper connection that's been hidden in plain sight.
So are they basically rejecting the traditional Christian view of Lucifer as the fallen angel, God's enemy?
That's putting it mildly. They completely reframe him as this bringer of knowledge, even a rebel who's going against a quote-unquote false god.
Hold on, a false god. Now that's where things get really interesting. Are they suggesting there's a different true God out there?
That seems to be the direction they're heading in. To back up their claims, they pull in some pretty obscure stuff. Like, have you ever heard of the secret book of John?
I have, actually. It's considered a Gnostic text,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, and the Gnostics had some pretty unique ideas about creation and the nature of God. Ideas that definitely didn't fit in with what became mainstream Christianity.
Well, this secret book of John and a bunch of other texts like it were basically rejected by the early church. They were labeled as heretical.
And it's fascinating to explore these alternative versions of Christianity. You know, they offer such different perspectives on figures like Jesus and Lucifer.
So the video uses these texts to basically rewrite the whole story.
It definitely puts a new spin on things, that's for sure.
Okay, so now they jump into the Garden of Eden's story, you know, Adam and Eve and the whole forbidden fruit thing.
Oh, right. Of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat of it.
Exactly. But here's the kicker. They claim that according to the secret book of John, it was actually Jesus who told Adam and Eve to eat the fruit.
Whoa, hold up. That's a wild interpretation, like completely flipping the script. So they're
Yeah.
saying Jesus is the one who wanted them to gain knowledge, even if it meant defying God.
That's what they're arguing. And get this, the secret book of John also describes this idea of a true God as a divine mind.
Oh, wow. A divine mind. That's definitely a concept that appears in other mystical and philosophical traditions.
It sounds kind of trippy, right? But the video contrasts this true God, this divine mind, with the creator God who they paint as kind of a lesser being.
A deceptive entity.
Yeah.
You know, this idea of two opposing forces, a true God and a false God, that's a type of dualism.
Dualism, huh?
Yeah, it pops up in all sorts of religions and philosophies throughout history.
I never thought about it that way. It kind of sounds like a sci-fi movie or something. This cosmic battle between light and darkness, knowledge and ignorance. And they're saying Jesus is on the side of the true God trying to free us from the creator God's control. It's pretty mind-blowing.
It's a dramatic reimagining of the Christian narrative, that's for sure. And to highlight this contrast even further, they bring up a really common point of discussion when it comes to Christianity.
What's that?
The big difference between the God of the Old Testament and the Jesus of the New Testament.
Yeah, like in the Old Testament, God's often depicted as this vengeful figure, but then Jesus is all about love and forgiveness. The video even throws in that classic line from the Sermon on the Mount.
Turn the other cheek.
That's the one! You know, it almost feels like they're talking about two completely different beings.
It's an apparent contradiction that's caused a lot of debate and different interpretations among theologians and scholars over the centuries.
So the video sets up this idea of Jesus the rebel. He's aligned with this true God of light and knowledge battling against the creator God who wants to keep us in the dark. And to really drive this point home, they bring in another one of those non-canonical texts, the Gospel of Thomas.
Oh, it's the Gospel of Thomas. Now, that one's a real head-scratcher. What do they focus on from that text?
Well, they zero in on this idea that we as humans are inherently divine. Like the Gospel of Thomas says we can actually achieve godhood through self-knowledge.
Ah, so it's about realizing our true nature, that divine spark within us.
Exactly. It's all about inner transformation and reaching our full potential, which, if you think about it, kind of ties back into the video's main argument that both Jesus and Lucifer are about bringing knowledge and helping humanity achieve divinity.
I've started to see the connections they're making here.
And to throw in another twist, they introduce the Gospel of Judas.
Now, that's one that really shook things up when it was discovered. You know, the story of Judas, the betrayer of Jesus, is one of the most famous in Christianity.
Yeah, but this gospel paints a whole different picture, doesn't it?
It completely flips the narrative. According to the Gospel of Judas, Judas was actually the disciple who truly understood Jesus.
Really?
Yeah, it claims the other disciples totally misunderstood Jesus' teachings and would end up leading their followers down the wrong path.
So instead of being the villain, Judas is like the enlightened one in this version of the story.
That's how it's presented, yeah. And when you think about it, the video seems to be showing us that even within Christianity itself, there are completely different ways of interpreting these stories.
It's not as black and white as we might think, huh?
Right. And then they bring it all back to their central argument, the big takeaway from the whole video.
Okay, I'm ready for it.
They say that both Jesus and Lucifer are archetypes.
Archetypes. Remind me what that means again?
Think of them as these universal symbols that pop up in stories and myths all over the world, in all different cultures. They represent these core human experiences.
Okay, I get it. So like the hero, the villain, the wise old man, those are all archetypes, right? So are they saying Jesus and Lucifer fit into the same archetype?
Exactly. They're arguing that both figures embody the archetype of the illuminated liberator.
Yeah.
You know, the one who comes along to challenge the status quo and bring knowledge to humanity.
So whether it's Jesus or Lucifer, they're both about shaking things up and helping us evolve. Wow, that really is mind-blowing when you think about it.
It really makes you reconsider these figures in a whole new light.
And maybe even question everything we thought we knew about good and evil, religion, and the whole shebang.
Exactly. It raises some really important questions. How do we interpret these ancient texts? What is the true nature of good and evil? And how do these symbols and archetypes, like the illuminated liberator, shape our understanding of the world? There's a lot to unpack here.
So much to think about already. But let's try to connect this back to our listeners for a second. You know, why should anyone care about this whole Jesus and Lucifer thing? What's the takeaway for, like, everyday life?
That's a great question. It might seem pretty out there at first glance, but I think the real value here is in questioning our assumptions.
Yeah.
You know, even if you don't agree with every single point the video makes, it still makes you stop and think.
It really makes you wonder, like, how much of what we believe is just based on what we were told growing up, you know, versus stuff we've actually explored and figured out for ourselves.
Right. It's all about digging a little deeper, like asking yourself, why do I believe what I believe? And those are important questions for everyone, no matter what your religious background is.
Yeah. Or even if you're not religious at all, it's about thinking for yourself, being curious and open to new ideas.
Exactly. And in today's world, I think that's more important than ever.
Okay, so let's zoom back in on the video itself and hit the key points again, just to make sure we're all on the same page. They start by highlighting all that light imagery that's used to describe both Jesus and Lucifer.
Right, and that shared imagery really challenges the idea that they're total opposites. Like, light is usually associated with good things.
Yeah.
So it makes you think, maybe there's more to this Lucifer guy than we've been told.
Then they bring in those non-canonical texts, like that secret book of John, and that's where they start arguing that Jesus was actually rebelling against the creator God.
Yeah, and even encouraging Adam and Eve to seek knowledge.
Which totally flips the Garden of Eden story on its head. I mean, talk about a plot twist.
And from there, they introduce the concept of a true God. This divine mind that exists outside of the creator God, who they say is a lesser being.
It's like this whole cosmic conspiracy is unfolding.
Right. And that's where that dualistic framework really kicks in. Jesus is siding with the true God, the divine mind, to help free humanity from the control of this creator God.
And to drive that point home even further, they really play up the contrast between the Old Testament God and the Jesus of the New Testament.
You know, the Old Testament God is often shown as this vengeful, wrathful figure. But then Jesus is all about love, forgiveness, compassion. It's almost hard to reconcile those two images.
It's like they're totally different characters or something. It makes you wonder if they're even talking about the same being at all.
And then we get to the Gospel of Thomas, and this idea that we as humans are inherently divine.
And that we can achieve godhood through self-knowledge.
It's all about that journey of inner transformation and recognizing the divine spark within ourselves, which, kind of circles back to the video's main argument.
That both Jesus and Lucifer are about bringing knowledge and helping us tap into our full potential.
Exactly. And to add yet another layer to the mix, they bring in the Gospel of Judas.
Now, that one's pretty mind-blowing. I mean, Judas is usually seen as the ultimate betrayer, right?
Yeah, in the traditional story, he's the bad guy. But the Gospel of Judas flips the whole script.
It says Judas was the only one who really understood Jesus.
And that the other disciples were the ones who would mislead their followers.
Wow. So the video is basically saying there are multiple ways of understanding even the most well-known stories from Christianity. It's not as simple as good versus evil or right versus wrong.
There's always more to the story than meets the eye. And that brings us back to their central argument, the idea that both Jesus and Lucifer are archetypes.
Archetypes, like those universal symbols that appear in myths and stories across different cultures, right?
Right. They're arguing that both figures represent the archetype of the illuminated liberator.
The one who challenges the status quo and brings knowledge to humanity.
Exactly. So whether it's Jesus or Lucifer, they're both about shaking things up, breaking free from old ways of thinking. It really makes you think about these figures in a whole new light.
And maybe even reconsider our own beliefs about good and evil, religion, the whole 9 yards.
It's about challenging our assumptions and looking at things from different perspectives.
All right, so here's the big question for all of you listening out there. What do you think about all of this? Could Jesus and Lucifer actually be two sides of the same coin?
It's a wild thought, isn't it? Does it resonate with you at all, or does it clash with your own beliefs?
I mean, it's definitely made me think about things in a new way.
That's the point. Even if you don't agree with everything, hopefully it sparked some curiosity and got those mental gears turning.
Because even if you don't buy into this whole Jesus-Lucifer connection, I think the bigger takeaway is that there's always more to learn.
And that's the beauty of it. The more we explore these different perspectives, the more we understand not just the world around us, but ourselves too.
It's like that saying, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. This deep dive has definitely put me in that space.
Me too. And that's a good place to be, I think. It keeps us humble and open to new possibilities.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this? What's the question or idea that you really want them to ponder?
I think more than anything, the big thing we need to do these days is really learn how to think for ourselves, especially with all the information flying around out there,
It's like drinking from a fire hose. How do we even know what to believe anymore?
Right. So it's even more important to question everything, even those ideas that seem like, well, everybody knows them, right?
Like, who would have thought we'd be questioning the whole Jesus-Lucifer thing?
Exactly. Because when you start asking questions, when you look at things from different angles, that's when things start to get really interesting.
And honestly, I think that kind of thinking, being able to think critically and for yourself, that's like a superpower these days.
Couldn't agree more. So for everyone listening out there, here's a thought. What if, and just hear me out on this one, what if the real battle isn't between good and evil or, Jesus and Lucifer?
What if it's something else?
What if it's about dogma versus, that desire for real knowledge?
Like those who just blindly accept what they're told versus those who are always seeking, questioning, trying to figure things out for themselves.
Yeah. Maybe that's where true illumination really lies. Not in following blindly, but in that constant journey of discovery.
Wow. That's a powerful thought. Thanks to everyone for joining us on this wild ride. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep those minds open.